Okay. Um, let's get started. This is part 5 of our series on the 4th chapter of Bava Metzia, Perek HaZahav. And we are going to start at the very, very bottom of page 45 B and end up near the top of 46B. Okay, so we are still in the middle of what we were working on last week. Last week, we were working on the question of whether money or coins can be used as the object that you pick up as part of the process of chalipin, which is but we also talked about the question of whether you could acquire coins using chalipin. And toward the end of what we said last week, we said that even the people who think you can't use coins as the object to pick up in chalipin still think that you can use chalipin to acquire money. So we start this evening with a tiyufta, with a braita brought to disprove that idea, the idea that you can acquire money using chalipin. And it's a weird case, or at least by the time the Gemara is done modifying it, it's a weird case. So let's get started here. So Metzia. They suggested a tifta, haya omed bagoren, ve'en biado maot. So if somebody is standing on the threshing floor, and the threshing floor is going to be where you're going to do all of the processing of your grain, not just the threshing, but also the winnowing and eventually the packing your grain up into bags to carry it home for storage. So everything that happens between when you cut the stalks off of their roots and when you have a bag of plain seeds to take home happens on the threshing floor. And one of the things that usually happens in the threshing floor is taking the trumot and masrot, because they become obligatory once you finish the processing and put your grain into a pile ready to go into storage bags. And so here you are, you've taken your truma and your maser rishon and presumably gifted them respectively to a kohen and a Levi. But now you have your maaser sheni, which is, supposing it's years 1, 2, 4, or 5 of the Shemitah cycle, which is 9% of your crop. And supposing that you actually grew enough to eat this year, that's going to be a huge amount of grain, not an amount you're actually going to be able to carry to Yerushalayim. So instead, you're going to redeem it with money. You're going to take the money to Yerushalayim, buy different food with that money, and eat it there in Yerushalayim. But in order to do that, you need money. And the thing is that there's also an advantage to having a second person there, because if you redeem your Maaser Sheni yourself, you pay a penalty. You have to pay 125% of the fair price of the grain. This is not true now. Now we redeem all the Maaser Sheni you can with a bare minimum of a pruta, because we are going to have to destroy the money because we don't actually have any way of eating holy things now. But supposing you're living in a time and a place where it's possible to be tahor and have your food be tahor and eat Maaser Sheni properly in Yerushalayim, if you redeem it yourself, you're going to have to pay 125% of a fair price, which is going to have you, right, to begin with, you were going to have the fair price of 9% of your crop that you're going to have to schlep to Yerushalayim and eat there, which severely limits the amount of food you have to eat at home. And if we're now going to make you pay an extra 25%, then that presumably limits even further the resources that you have for being at home. So what you'd like to do is sell your Maaser Sheni to somebody else Jewish and have them redeem it in the process. And that way they only have to pay a regular fair price for it. You don't have to. They don't have to pay a penalty. But what we have here is we've got two people standing on the threshing floor, and neither of them has any money with them. Okay, so What he's supposed to do is Omer l'chavero, he says to his friend, Hare pirot halalu nitunim l'cha b'matana. He says, this pile of fruit, although we call grain fruit all the time in the Mishnah and the Gemara, and we're on a threshing floor, so the fruit is really, really grain, probably wheat, or it could be barley. And this pile of fruit is given to you as a gift, and then you say to him, and now I'd like to buy back that Maser Sheni from you that I just gifted you. I'd like to buy it, the Maser Sheni I just gifted you, back from you with the money that I have at home in my dresser drawer under my socks, or whatever. You have to specify where the money is located. And it seems like we're going through this song and dance of gifting the food to the other person and then buying it from them, because he didn't have any money, because it says he's standing on the threshing floor and he doesn't have any money. So the Gemara says, Tama de'ein biyado ma'ot. The Braita told us that the reason he has to do this is because he's not holding any coins. Ha'im yesh biyado ma'ot. But if he had money with him now, then likni lehu le'idach b'mashicha, he could hand the money to the other person, right? Instead of gifting the other person the grain, you could gift the other person the money. Ufarik dehachi adif dehavele nachri, and then the other guy could redeem the grain by handing you back the money, and that would be better because the other person is a nachri, he's a stranger, meaning he's not you. So he just pays the regular price for the Maser Sheni. So it seems like it would be easier if you could just give the other person the money. That seems like that's the normal thing to do, is you keep the Maser Sheni, you give the other person the money, and then they use the money to buy your Maser Sheni from you, and then they give the whole thing back to you again. And the net result is you end up the owner of your grain, which is no longer holy and is now regular use grain. You also end up the owner of the money you started out as the owner of, except now the money is holy and can only be used as Maser Sheni. And the other person is just doing you a favor by participating in this process. Okay, but it seems like our preference would be for you to transfer the ownership of the money back and forth instead of transferring the ownership of the food back and forth. Okay. And if you say that coins could be acquired through chalipin, then if you could transfer the ownership of the money using chalipin, then let the person who owns the food, instead of gifting the food to the second person and then buying it back from them, let them instead gift them the money by doing chalipin, by giving them a handkerchief, or really any other object. At that point, now the other person can say, okay, now I'm redeeming your Maser Sheni with the money that I have in your sock drawer at home, because now the money would belong to them because you gave it to them with your handkerchief. If that were possible, that seems like it would make more sense and it would be easier. Problem is, it must be delaytle sudar. It must be he does not have a piece of cloth. Okay, now we're imagining now two people standing on a threshing floor, neither of them in possession of any pieces of cloth. Okay, so we've got two naked farmers here standing on a threshing floor. So the Gemara, instead of at this point responding that that's ridiculous, says v'nikninhu niale agav karka. Well, in that case, let him transfer the money with land. In other words, you could say, well, this piece of land over here is yours, and with the land, you also get the money. That's also a way of transferring objects that you don't have access to at the moment. And you can take possession of land without having any objects. The guy just has to go stand on the land, and you could take possession of it. That would work. But it must be delaytle karka. It must be that the person who owns the food does not own any land, at least not any land there. V'ha omed bagorin katani. But excuse me, you said at the beginning of the Breita that he's standing in a threshing floor. Well, okay, I can solve that. Maybe it's a goren she'eno shalo. It must be that he's standing on a threshing floor that's not his. Okay, so now we have two naked men standing on a threshing floor in which one of them owns all the food that's present. Neither of them owns the land that they're standing on. This seems like a what we might call a very unusual case if we were being polite about it. And the Gemara is not especially polite about it. It says, begavra artilai delate v'lo klum. And is the Tana going to waste his time repeating things in order to teach us about a naked man who doesn't have any stuff? Like, really, that seems like an outrageously unusual case. And it doesn't, if that's the only way you can understand the case, then we must have made a mistake somewhere along the way, because that's nuts. Okay, so the Gemara says, "Elalav shmamina ein matbeh nitbeh b'chalipin shmamina." So it must be, in fact, that you can't transfer the ownership of money using chalipin. If you can't transfer ownership of money using chalipin, then we didn't have any particular reason for insisting these guys are naked, because the reason we said that was so that they wouldn't have an object with which they could do chalipin, right? If they're wearing clothes, they could take it off and use it as an object. But if they can't do chalipin anyway, in order to transfer the money, then there's no reason that they shouldn't be wearing clothes. So now what we have is just two poor farmers who are, borrowing a threshing floor in order to thresh their grain, because they're so poor they don't have their own threshing floor. That's sort of believable. It was the naked part that seemed insane. Okay, but that means that it must be that not only can you not use a coin as the object to pick up for chalipin, but you also can't use chalipin as a method of transfer to transfer ownership of money. Okay. And we go on, V'af Rav Papa Hadarbe, and even Rav Papa, who's one of the people that we had last week telling us that you can transfer money using chalipin, even he must have changed his mind. He had a Rav Papa, Havule Tracer Alfe Dinare Bechozai, because Rav Papa had 2,000 dinars. I don't know if they're silver dinars or gold dinars, but either way, that's an awful lot of money that was being held for him in Bechozai, right? Somebody in Bechozai was holding this money that belonged to Rav Papa, and he needed to retrieve it. But apparently he doesn't want to go to Bechozai himself. He wants to send somebody else. So Achninhu Rav Shmuel Bar Acha Agav Asifa Debete. So he transferred ownership of the money to Rav Shmuel Bar Acha with the threshold of his house, meaning he gave Rav Shmuel Bar Acha is standing there in his front doorway, and he says, "I'm giving you the piece of my house that you're standing on, the doorway, and with it, I'm giving you these 12,000 dinars that are over there in Bechozai, so that you will be fully empowered to go collect them." I assume that this is a relationship of trust in which Rav Shmuel Bar Acha is going to give it back to him when he returns, because that seems to be what happens. Ki'ata nafik la'ape ad tavech, and then when Shmuel Bar Acha came back, Rav Papa went all the way out to Tavech. I don't know where these places are. I trust that that's a place that would be impressive for somebody to travel to meet you, in order to meet him, because he was so happy that Rav Shmuel Bar Acha had come back with the money. And it seems like if you could transfer money using chalipin, it would have made more sense for Rav Papa to say, "Here, pick up my handkerchief, and then you'll own my 12,000 dinars, rather than I'm gifting you with the threshold of my house that you're standing on, so that you can own my 12,000 dinars." So it must be, if Rav Papa did it that way, it must be that it wouldn't have worked to do it with chalipin. Seems to be their conclusion, although I could see someone saying, "Well, there's more than one way to do it. That's just the way he chose." But apparently that's not where we're going here. And we're now returning back to our other issue, the question of whether you could use coins for chalipin, as opposed to the question of whether you can transfer them using chalipin. And Ula also said you can't use coins for chalipin. Rabbi Asi ein matbea nasa chalipin, and Rabbi Asi also said you can't use coins for chalipin. Rabba bar bar Chana amar Rabbi Yochanan ein matbea nasa chalipin, and likewise Rabba bar bar Chana said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan that we don't use coins for chalipin. Okay, so now we are going to challenge Ula. So a second ago, Ula said coins can't be used for chalipin, and now we're going back to our original topic, the topic of whether you can use picking up a coin as a chalipin. And we're going to try to suggest to Ula that we have a braita that demonstrates that you can. So ATV Rabbi Abba, Rabbi Abba suggested the following two to the Ula. Aresha hayu chamarav ufoalim ufoalav tov ino tobashu. So if he has his donkey drivers and his employees, and they come to him in the marketplace and they demand to be paid. Now the thing is, he's not carrying that kind of money with him, enough money to make payroll, standing in the marketplace, but these guys want to be paid right now. So he goes to the money changer, which is, the person who has lots of money in the marketplace. And shulchani tainli bedinar ma'ot v'farnasim. So he says to the money changer, give me a dinar's worth of money so that I can pay these guys. And I'm going to send you a dinar's worth of coins and a tresit, which is apparently another kind of coin, from the coins that I have at my house. Okay, so he is offering to pay effectively the money changer a tresit, a small coin, for the as the opportunity cost that the money changer is losing by not having the money temporarily, and also presumably for the trust that the money changer is giving that the guy will in fact pay him. Now, if this were a loan, we would call that interest, and it would be illegal. But we seem to be asserting that this is legal, at least under some circumstances. Im yesh lo ma'ot mutar, if he has coins at home, this is permitted. V'im lav asur, if he does not actually have the money at home, this is forbidden. It is not forbidden because he's lying to the money changer and defrauding him, although that is also a good reason why this should not be done and is wrong. But I think in particular, they think it's forbidden because in that case, it's a loan at interest. You can't actually borrow a dinar and pay back a dinar and a tresit. That's exactly what the Torah says you're not allowed to do. Right? And interest is forbidden not just for the lender, but also for the borrower and everybody else involved, the witnesses, the scribe, everyone involved in the case is violating the Torah when you have interest. So the fact that the borrower is the one proposing it does not make it any more legal. Okay. Now, somehow we're going to have to explain why this transaction, if the guy has money at home, why this transaction is not a loan with interest. And we saw an example very much like this that we called se'ah b'se'ah, right? Borrowing a se'ah of grain and paying back a se'ah of grain later, a number of weeks ago, where you're only allowed, in fact, to borrow and pay back money because produce, especially food, but also other kinds of merchandise, change in price over time. And then you will almost certainly not be paying back exactly the same amount of value as what you borrowed when you give back exactly the same thing you borrowed. I mean, I'm sorry, if you give back the same object you borrowed, that's a different thing. But borrowing, food, eating it, and then giving back identical food is what's not allowed, because the change in value is at least a 50-50 chance of having increased value, in which case now you're paying back more than you borrowed, and that's interest. And we said there that that's permitted if you actually have the stuff, but you can't access it. And we called that case the case of borrowing until my son gets home or until I find the key. That case will come back to us again in a few minutes. In any case, we said that the reason why that works, why that's permitted, is that when I borrow the stuff from you while I have identical stuff at home, I'm not really borrowing from you. What I'm really doing is trading you your stuff for my stuff, so that now I become the owner of your grain or eggs or flour or whatever it is, and you become the owner of my grain or eggs or flour, which are locked up someplace I can't access right now because my son didn't come home with the key yet, so that I can use the stuff that I've just newly acquired, my new grain. And then once my son comes with the key, I'll give you your grain, which is now the grain that's locked up. Okay. Now, the thing is that if that's what we're saying here, then we need some way of transferring ownership to the shulchani of the money that's back at his house. And at the moment, we are assuming that that method of transfer is chalipin, that when he picks up the money that the shulchani is giving him to pay the donkey driver and the other employees, that picking up of that money causes the other money that he has at home to now belong to the money changer through the mechanism of chalipin. Okay, now back on the Gemara. So if you think that money can't be used for chalipin, then havyale halva asur. If I can't use money for chalipin, it seems, this is Rabbi Abba talking to Ula, that Rabbi Abba says to Ula, if I can't use money for chalipin, then it seems that I'm not trading the money of the money changer for the money that I have at home. Instead, I'm just borrowing the money changer's money, in which case that's a loan, and it's forbidden because I'm paying back more than I borrowed. Ishtik. Ula was quiet. He did not respond. But then he did. He thinks for a minute, and he says, Amarle, Dilma idi beprutetot shan. He says, well, maybe all of the money in that Breita is not actually money. Maybe it's all unstamped coins. We had the word in the Mishnah, we had the word asimon, which we said was an unstamped coin, a planchet. It turns out an asimon is actually a silver planchet. A copper planchet is a prutita, presumably related to the word pruta, which is the copper coin after it's been stamped. So Ula says maybe the money that the money changer was giving him and the money that he paid back, maybe all of that wasn't really money. It was really unstamped planchets, in which case this isn't money. So it could absolutely be acquired using chalipin, just like any other lump of metal can. And so deleka alayhu tava, because it doesn't have the image of a coin on it. V'idi perahavu, in which case both the thing that he's getting from the money changer and the thing that he has at home are both fruit rather than money. And we shum hachi niknu b'chalipin, and because of that, chalipin works on them. And so maybe, basically what Ula says is maybe that Breita is not talking about money, even though it sounded like it was talking about money. And Rabbi Abba agrees with him. He says, Amarle in dekanami dektani yafe dinar v'trisi. And he says, yeah, actually, that makes more sense than the way I was trying to read the Breita, because it says that some money that's worth a dinar and a tresit, veloktani dinar yafe v'tresit, and he doesn't say I will send you an attractive, a good dinar and a tresit. It says I will send you money worth a dinar and a tresit. That sounds like he's sending him something that's of value, but not actually either a dinar or a tresit. So maybe not coins at all. Shma mina. Okay, so we seem to have come to the conclusion that that Breita is not about money. So that Breita does tell us that we're doing chalipin there, but it doesn't tell us anything about money because it's not what it's talking about. But Rav Ashi thinks he can do it a different way. Rav Ashi Amar, le'olam b'damim u'v'prutztot. And Rashi says actually the Breita can be about either money or prutatot, works either way, doesn't matter. Kevan de'it le nasek omer halveni ad shiavo b'ni o ad shem samaftech. Since he has money at home, it's as if he says, lend me money until my son comes home or until I find the key. And apparently that doesn't necessarily require, that kind of trading doesn't necessarily require chalipin. Possibly because the because we're not really trading the money, we're just, or the whatever it is for that the person's giving you for whatever it is that you have at home, we're just imagining that since we could have done that, therefore it's not really a loan. And since we don't need to really do it, it doesn't really matter what mechanism we would have used in the hypothetical in which we were actually doing it. That's not a terribly strong answer, but it's the best I can do trying to explain what people say about what Rav Ashi is trying to say. Okay, we have another Breita that we're going to bring to try to prove this, which is not necessarily going to make things clearer. Tashma, hakol ha'na'aseh damim ba'acher, kevan shezacha zeh nitchayev zeh b'chalipin. Anything that is made into money for something else, or used as money for something else, once one person has acquired it, the other person acquires a debt by means of chalipin. There's a lot that needs explaining in that sentence, but the part that the Gemara is interested in is the thing that is being used as money for something else. And whatever it is, apparently, when A hands it to B, B then owes something because there has been a chalipin. So if we could demonstrate that this stuff is money, then it would mean that we were using money for chalipin. So the Gemara says, Kol ha'na'aseh damim ba'acher, something that's used as money for something else. Ma'inihu matbea, that sounds like money. Something that's used as value for something else sounds like money. I when I want to buy food or clothing or furniture or whatever, you tell me what the value is of that stuff, and then I come up with coins that equal that value. I give you the coins, you give me my stuff. That sounds like coins are what you use to represent the value of something else. In which case, ushma mina matbea naseh chalipin. In which case, I can learn from this that coins can be used for chalipin. But we are not going to let it sit like that. Among other things, because it would be really, really strange if we had to adopt a use of a nickname for money. Things that are used to represent the value of something else. Like what, if you meant money, why not just say so? That doesn't make a lot of sense. So Rav Yehuda does not read it that way. Amar Rav Yehuda. Rav Yehuda says this is what the Braita is really saying. Kol hanishom damim ba'acher, anything which is assessed as having the value of something else. Once one person has acquired this person has also acquired a debt using chalipin, which seems to mean that I have something, I want to trade it for something else, and we're going to get the objects appraised and ascertain that they have the same value as each other, or ascertain how many of my objects has the same value as your object, and then we're going to trade. And so the something which is assessed as having the same value as something else, then almost by definition is a non-money object being used for barter rather than a coin. In which case, if we're going to read it the way Rav Yehuda reads it, then yes, we're using the first object that's transferred as chalipin, but that doesn't tell us anything about money because we're talking about non-money objects used for barter. And Rav Yehuda says, Hachinami mistabra midiktani seifa. And in fact, this makes more sense because the end of the Braita says, Ketzad, how do you do that? Hechalif shor bepara o chamor b'shor. And then it's the example that it uses to explain is if you traded a bull for a cow or a donkey for a bull. And those are definitely not examples of paying for something with money. Those are definitely examples of bartering animals. Shma mina. So Rav Yehuda thinks he's proved that this Braita is in fact talking about barter. It's definitely not talking about money. But we still have a problem because at the beginning, we thought the Braita had something to do with money. And I think we're assuming that the Gemara had the whole Braita in front of it at the time. So so when you thought at the beginning that it was talking about coins, my Ketzad, what were you doing with this thing at the end that says, what does it work? How does that work? And then talks about bartering animals. Like, if you thought the beginning was talking about money, how were you understanding the end part? So it seems like we're going to have to do this. Hachikar, this is what we must have thought it meant. Uperi nami avdi chalipin. That the first part of the Braita was talking about money and was saying that when you pay for something with money, that produces a debt in the other person, which is done through chalipin. And then halfway through the Braita says, oh, and by the way, it's also possible to do chalipin with objects. Let me give you some example of chalipin done with merchandise. And then it said, how would we do that? Meaning, how would we do chalipin with something that's not money? And then the example is hechalif shor b'para o chamor b'shor. If you exchange a bull for a cow or a donkey for a bull, which is not the most compelling reading in the universe. But I have to say that it beats suggesting that an entire Braita is talking about naked farmers who somehow managed to own the grain without owning the land that they're farming it on. So this definitely takes at least second place this evening in the wacky interpretation of a text department. Okay, that is what I have for you this evening. Do you have questions?
This whole thing was really wacky. Oh my
I'm afraid so. It
was all just an example just to show whether money can be used for a chalipin or not.
Well, some of them were trying to show whether money could be used for chalipin, and some of them were trying to show whether money could be transferred using chalipin. But yes.
Right.
But it only This still only takes second place in the crazy naked people interpretations of Tannaitic text department. The Gemara on the first Mishnah in Shabbat, if I remember correctly, thinks that the first Mishnah, which sounds like this very dignified business of a householder inside the house and a poor person outside the house, and how do we get stucca to the poor person? And there are so many different ways to violate Shabbat in the process. And by the time the Gemara is done with it, they're both naked and one of them is standing in a pit. I don't remember why. Oh, and one of them is a dwarf. I don't remember exactly why the logic ended up that way, but that one was nuttier than this.
Yeah, that sounds really strange.
But the thing is that once you accept that all of the cases are shorthand for abstractions, for abstract ideas,
right? Then it doesn't matter. Yeah.
Well, that's also true. But what I was gonna say is that you end up over time possibly polishing the abstractions until they're a little bit more polished than they were when the original cases were written. And then in order to make the abstractions still work with the cases have to be modified. Because I think that the complexity of the ideas is developing over time, is continuing to develop after the cases are written. And then you have to do strange things to make the pieces still fit together.
Right, right. Understood.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay. Then I guess I will see you guys next Monday. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Deborah.
Thank you.